Samuel Mitchell's weathered hand froze mid-reach toward his wallet, his entire body going rigid as stone. The 15-dollar bill trembled between his fingers as he stared at the emaciated German shepherd lying in the dirt, her intelligent brown eyes holding secrets that made his blood run cold. This wasn't just any abandoned dog. Grace's small gasp pierced the autumn air as the shepherd lifted her noble head with military precision despite her skeletal frame. The cardboard sign reading "Last Chance" fluttered in the Texas breeze like a death warrant. Sam's mind raced back 18 months to his son Michael's funeral, to the uniformed honor guard, to the questions that never got answered. This dog's bearing, her alert posture even in starvation, he'd seen it before in working animals. "Grandpa, we have to save her," Grace whispered, her young voice cracking with desperate urgency. But as Sam looked into those knowing eyes, one terrifying question burned through his chest. What if this dog was the key to discovering how his son really died? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Sunset Ridge, Texas stretched beneath the September sun like a faded photograph, its main street lined with weathered storefronts that had witnessed better decades. The population sign still read 3200, though half the farmhouses on the outskirts sat empty, their owners driven away by drought and economic hardship. This was a town where everyone knew everyone else's business, where secrets festered in the heat and gossip traveled faster than the morning paper. Samuel Mitchell had called this place home for 72 years. His weathered hands bore the scars of 4 decades welding pipe and steel, building the infrastructure that kept rural Texas running. Now, those same hands shook slightly as he helped his granddaughter Grace from his battered Ford pickup at the weekly farmer's market. The tremor wasn't from age. It was from the weight of loss that had settled into his bones like winter cold. 3 years ago, Martha had slipped away in her sleep, leaving behind only the scent of lavender on her pillow and a garden that Sam couldn't bear to tend. 18 months later, their son Michael, Grace's father, died in what police called a single-vehicle accident on Highway 290. But Sam knew his boy. Michael had been a careful driver, a thoughtful man who asked too many questions and dug too deep into things that made powerful people uncomfortable. Grace clutched his hand tighter as they walked through the market. At 9 years old, she carried shadows too heavy for her small shoulders. Since her parents' deaths, words came harder for her, as if speaking might invite more tragedy into their lives. Her blonde hair caught the afternoon light, reminding Sam painfully of Martha at that age, before life taught them both that promises could be broken and futures could disappear overnight. The Mitchell house sat on 3 acres outside town, its white paint peeling and Martha's rose bushes growing wild. Sam's workshop in the garage had become a museum of half-finished projects, tools gathering dust while he struggled to find purpose beyond getting Grace to school and putting food on the table. His welder's pension stretched thin, especially with the mortgage payments that seemed to increase every year despite his protests to the bank. Dr. Sarah Collins had been their family physician for over 20 years. A sturdy woman in her 60s who drove her own truck and delivered straight talk along with medical care. She'd been the one to hold Sam's hand when Martha passed, the one to examine the inconsistencies in Michael's accident report that the sheriff's department refused to investigate further. The market bustled with the usual crowd, farmers selling the last of their summer produce, craftspeople hawking handmade goods, and families like theirs trying to stretch their dollars. But today felt different. Grace had been unusually quiet during the drive, staring out the window with an intensity that worried Sam. She'd been having the dreams again, the ones where she called out for her daddy in the middle of the night. Neither of them knew that 30 yards away, beside a rusted trailer selling farm supplies, their lives were about to change forever. Grace's grip tightened on Sam's calloused hand as they navigated through the Saturday crowd at the farmer's market. The September heat shimmered off the asphalt, carrying the mingled scents of kettle corn, diesel exhaust, and something else, something that made the little girl slow her steps and turn her head like a compass, finding true north. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chatter of bargaining customers and crying babies. "Do you hear that?" Sam paused, his weathered face creasing as he strained to listen. Beyond the normal market sounds, he caught it. A low, barely perceptible whine that seemed to pull at something deep in his chest. Grace was already moving toward the sound, her small feet carrying her past the produce stands and craft tables toward the far end of the market where the less prosperous vendors set up their wares. There, beside a dented Airstream trailer advertising farm supplies more, sat a sight that stopped Sam's heart. A German shepherd lay curled on a dirty blanket, her once proud coat now dull and patchy, ribs clearly visible beneath the matted fur. But it was her eyes that held him, intelligent brown eyes that held a dignity that suffering couldn't erase, watching the passing crowd with the alert stillness of a soldier on guard duty. A young man in his 20s sat on a folding chair beside the dog, his nervous energy evident in the way he kept glancing around the market. His clothes were too big, hanging loose on his thin frame, and his hands shook as he held a cardboard sign that read, "Last Chance, $15" in uneven black marker. When he noticed Sam and Grace approaching, his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "She's a good dog," the man said quickly, his words tumbling over each other. "Real good, just can't keep her no more moving, you know." "Can't take pets where I'm going." Grace knelt beside the shepherd without hesitation, her small hand extended palm up in the universal gesture of peace. The dog lifted her noble head, studying the child with an intensity that made Sam's breath catch. There was recognition there, as if the animal was seeing something in Grace that others missed. "What's her name?" Grace asked, her voice clearer and stronger than Sam had heard it in months. The young man's eyes darted away. "Liberty. Her name's Liberty." He wiped his palms on his jeans, leaving damp streaks on the faded denim. "Look, I ain't trying to pressure nobody, but I got to be moving on real soon. Today, actually." Sam studied the dog more carefully. Despite her emaciated condition, Liberty held herself with a bearing he recognized, the disciplined posture of a working animal. Her ears swiveled at every sound, cataloging threats and safe zones with practiced efficiency. When a truck backfired in the parking lot, she didn't flinch or cower like an abused pet might. Instead, her head turned toward the sound with the cool assessment of a professional. "She trained?" Sam asked, crouching down despite the protest from his arthritic knees. "Yeah, she knows stuff. Commands and whatnot." The seller's voice cracked slightly. "Smart as they come. Smarter than most people, truth be told." Grace's face lit up as Liberty allowed her to stroke the soft fur behind her ears. The dog leaned into the touch with a quiet sigh, her eyes closing for just a moment before snapping open again, vigilant even in her brief moment of comfort. "Grandpa, look at her paws," Grace whispered. Sam followed her gaze to see the telltale wear patterns on Liberty's pads, the kind that came from extensive training on different surfaces, not just casual walks around a neighborhood. The seller shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing at his watch. "I hate to rush you folks, but we'll take her," Sam said, the words leaving his mouth before his practical mind could object. His last $15 was meant for Grace's school supplies, but looking at his granddaughter's face, truly animated for the first time since the funeral, he knew there was no choice to be made. As Sam counted out the crumpled bills, the seller's hands shook visibly as he folded them into his pocket. "You're doing a good thing," he said, but his eyes were sad, almost guilty. "She deserves better than what she's been through." "What happened to her?" Grace asked, still stroking Liberty's head. The man's face went pale. "Just life, you know. Sometimes life ain't kind to good creatures." He stood abruptly, folding his chair with jerky movements. "You take care of her real good, you hear? Don't let nobody take her from you." Before Sam could ask what he meant by that strange warning, the man had loaded his few possessions into the back of a battered pickup truck and driven away, leaving behind only dust and the lingering sense that they had just stepped into something much larger and more dangerous than a simple pet adoption. Liberty watched the truck disappear, then turned her attention back to Grace as if making a silent promise. The drive home should have been peaceful. Grace sat in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped protectively around Liberty's neck as the German Shepherd rested her head on the child's lap. But Sam's hands gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, his mind racing with questions he couldn't shake. The nervous seller, the dog's military bearing, the strange warning about not letting anyone take her. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. Liberty's condition became more apparent once they reached the house. She moved slowly up the porch steps, favoring her right hind leg, and Sam could see the network of scars beneath her matted coat. These weren't the random marks of neglect or abuse. They were surgical scars, precise and deliberate, the kind left by veterinary procedures that cost more money than most people in Sunset Ridge could afford. Dr. Sarah Collins arrived within an hour of Sam's call, her medical bag in one hand and a concerned expression on her weathered face. She'd been the Mitchell family doctor for over 20 years, and Sam trusted her judgment more than any official in town. As she knelt beside Liberty on the kitchen floor, her practiced hands moving gently over the dog's frame, her frown deepened. "This animal's been through professional medical care," she said quietly, glancing up at Sam. "Multiple surgeries by the look of it. See this scar pattern here?" She indicated a series of marks along Liberty's shoulder. "That's from orthopedic surgery. Expensive work. And this—" Her fingers found a spot behind Liberty's left ear where the fur grew differently. "Something was removed from here, surgically." Grace sat cross-legged on the linoleum, watching every movement with the intensity of a guardian angel. Liberty allowed the examination without protest, but her eyes never left the child's face, as if drawing strength from her presence. "Is she going to be okay?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Collins smiled, the first genuine expression Sam had seen from her all week. "She's malnourished and exhausted, but she's a fighter. Good muscle tone underneath it all. This dog's been trained for something important." She looked up at Sam with questioning eyes. "Any idea what her background might be?" Before Sam could answer, Liberty's entire body went rigid. Her ears swiveled toward the front of the house, and a low growl rumbled deep in her chest. Grace's hand instinctively moved to comfort her, but Liberty was already moving, positioning herself between the child and the front door with fluid precision. The knock came 30 seconds later, sharp, authoritative raps that made Sam's blood run cold. Through the window he could see a black sedan in his driveway, government plates barely visible in the fading light. Jake Morrison stood on the porch like he owned it, his badge wallet already open in his hand. Sam had known Morrison peripherally for years, a detective with the county sheriff's department who'd made a name for himself in organized crime cases. He was younger than Sam by nearly 25 years, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "Evening, Mr. Mitchell," Morrison said when Sam opened the door, his smile too wide and too white. "Sorry to bother you so late, but I understand you acquired a German Shepherd today. Mind if I take a look at her?" Sam's instincts, honed by decades of reading people and situations, screamed warnings. "What's your interest in my dog, detective?" "Just routine follow-up. We've had reports of stolen animals being sold at local markets." "Need to verify ownership, make sure everything's legitimate." Morrison's eyes moved past Sam, searching the interior of the house. "Won't take but a minute." Liberty appeared in the hallway behind Sam, and Morrison's reaction was instant and telling. His casual demeanor slipped for just a moment, replaced by something harder and more focused. The dog stared at him with unwavering intensity, her body language shifting from protective to actively threatening. "That's her," Morrison said quietly, and Sam caught the slip immediately. "Her? I thought you said this was about stolen animals in general." Morrison's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Figure of speech. Mind if I come in and take a closer look?" "Actually, I do mind," Sam said, stepping back and beginning to close the door. "You want to examine my dog? You can come back with a warrant." Morrison's hand shot out, holding the door open with surprising strength. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm trying to help you here. That animal might be dangerous. Former military working dogs can be unpredictable, especially when they've been discarded." The word hung in the air like a threat. Grace appeared beside Sam, her small hand slipping into his, and Liberty moved to flank her other side. The three generations stood together in the doorway, facing down the man who suddenly felt more like a predator than a protector. "What do you know about military working dogs, Detective?" Sam asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Morrison's mask slipped further. "More than you might think. Look, old man, you don't know what you're getting into here. That dog represents a significant investment, and there are people who want their property back." "Property?" Grace spoke for the first time, her young voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone. "She's not property. She's family." Something flickered across Morrison's face. Annoyance, maybe? Or something darker. "Kid doesn't understand the complexities of the situation. Mr. Mitchell, I'm going to give you some friendly advice. Return the dog to the proper authorities and everyone stays safe. Keep her and—" He shrugged, leaving the threat unspoken. Sam felt the weight of his service revolver in the gun safe upstairs, wished he'd thought to retrieve it before answering the door. But Liberty was already moving, positioning herself in a way that blocked Morrison's line of sight to Grace, while keeping herself between all potential threats and the child. "I think you need to leave now, Detective," Sam said. Morrison stepped back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Just trying to keep everyone safe, Mr. Mitchell. But I'll be back. Count on it." He paused at the bottom of the porch steps, turning back with that predatory smile. "Nice talking to you, Grace. You remind me of your daddy." He was always getting into situations that were too big for him to handle. The words hit Sam like a physical blow. Morrison knew about Michael's death, knew about the questions Sam had been asking. This wasn't about a stolen dog at all. As the black sedan disappeared into the gathering darkness, Sam double-checked all the locks and closed the curtains. Liberty settled beside Grace on the living room floor, but her ears remained alert, swiveling at every sound from outside. "Grandpa," Grace whispered, "that man scared Liberty. She knows him, doesn't she?" Sam looked down at his granddaughter, this wise child who saw things adults missed, and realized that their quiet life in Sunset Ridge had just become something much more dangerous. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said quietly. "I think she does." The anonymous note appeared under Sam's windshield wiper the next morning, its block letters harsh against the white paper. "Get rid of the dog or join your son." Sam's hands trembled as he read it, standing in his driveway with the September sun beating down on his shoulders. Liberty sat beside his truck, alert and watchful, her intelligent eyes scanning the tree line that bordered his property. Grace was still sleeping when he returned to the house, the note now locked in his gun safe upstairs. But Liberty followed him to the kitchen, her nails clicking softly on the linoleum as she positioned herself where she could watch both the front and back doors simultaneously. This wasn't random behavior. This was tactical positioning, the kind of awareness that came from professional training. The phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock, and Sam recognized Dr. Collins's voice immediately. "Sam, I need to see you and Grace. Today?" "There's something about Liberty's examination that I didn't want to discuss in front of the child yesterday." An hour later they sat in Dr. Collins' private office behind her clinic, Grace in the waiting room with Liberty and a coloring book. The older woman's face was grave as she spread a series of X-rays across her desk. "These scars aren't from accidents or abuse," she said without preamble. "This dog has had professional military-grade medical care. See this titanium pin in her hip? That's a $15,000 surgery. And these marks on her skull," she pointed to faint lines visible on the films. "Someone removed a microchip. Recently, within the last 6 months, I'd say." Sam studied the images, his welder's eye picking out the precise nature of the surgical work. Why would someone remove identification? Because they didn't want her traced back to her original handlers. Dr. Collins leaned back in her chair, her expression troubled. "Sam, I've been thinking about what you told me regarding that detective's visit. Military working dogs don't just disappear. They're either retired to their handlers, adopted through official programs, or—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Or what?" "Or they're disposed of when they become inconvenient." The weight of her words settled over Sam like a cold blanket. Outside the office window, Grace's laughter drifted in as she played with Liberty in the small garden behind the clinic. The sound seemed to come from another world, one where 9-year-old girls could simply love dogs without stumbling into conspiracies that cost lives. Dr. Collins opened her desk drawer and withdrew a manila folder. "I made some calls this morning to a friend who works with Military Animal Services. There's no record of any German Shepherd named Liberty being officially retired in the past year. But there are gaps in the database, dogs that were listed as transferred for specialized placement with no follow-up records." Sam's chest tightened. "How many?" 43 dogs in the past 18 months, all from units that were involved in sensitive operations. Drug interdiction, evidence recovery, high-value target location." She paused, meeting his eyes. "The kind of work that might uncover things powerful people want to stay buried." The pieces began clicking together in Sam's mind with the inexorable logic of a well-made joint. Michael's death. The questions his son had been asking about missing evidence in drug cases. Morrison's immediate recognition of Liberty and his thinly veiled threats. "My son was investigating something like this, wasn't he?" Dr. Collins nodded slowly. "I think Michael stumbled onto a network that was supposed to stay invisible. And I think Liberty here was his way of proving it." That afternoon, Sam called in a favor from his old National Guard buddy, Eddie Vasquez, who now worked private security in Austin. Eddie arrived at sunset, his weathered face grim as Sam explained the situation over coffee on the back porch. Liberty lay at Grace's feet, but her ears swiveled constantly, tracking sounds that human ears couldn't detect. "I've heard rumors," Eddie said quietly, glancing around to make sure Grace was out of earshot. "Dirty cops, maybe some federal agents, running side businesses with retired military assets. Dogs that know too much getting sold to fighting rings, or worse." He studied Liberty's scars with a professional eye. "This girl's seen combat, Sam. Real combat. The kind that leaves marks on the soul as well as the body." As if sensing their conversation, Liberty rose and moved to the edge of the porch, her body language shifting to high alert. Eddie noticed immediately, his hand moving instinctively toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. "She's tracking something," he whispered. The black sedan appeared at the end of Sam's long driveway moments later, moving slowly as if the driver was studying the property. Morrison sat behind the wheel, but he wasn't alone. Sam could see at least 2 other figures in the car, their faces obscured by the gathering darkness. "Grace?" Sam called softly. "Come here, sweetheart." The child appeared at his side instantly, her small hand finding his with the practiced ease of someone who had learned that safety was never guaranteed. Liberty positioned herself in front of both of them, her body coiled with barely contained energy. The sedan stopped just outside the property line, engine idling. Morrison climbed out slowly, his movements deliberate and theatrical. He was dressed differently tonight. Tactical pants, boots, and a jacket that bulged in all the wrong places. This wasn't a social call. "Mr. Mitchell," he called out across the yard, "I gave you fair warning yesterday. Time's up." Eddie stepped into view, his security credentials visible on his belt. "Evening, Detective. This is private property. Unless you have a warrant, I suggest you move along." Morrison's laugh carried across the evening air like broken glass. "You think your rent-a-cop friend changes anything, old man. That dog is evidence in a federal investigation. I'm authorized to seize her by any means necessary." "What investigation?" Eddie called back. "Show us the paperwork." "The paperwork got lost in the system," Morrison replied, and the menace in his voice was unmistakable. "Happens sometimes when cases involve national security." Grace stepped forward, her young voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Liberty isn't evidence. She's family. And families don't abandon each other, no matter what." Something shifted in Morrison's posture at the child's words, a tightening that spoke of barely controlled rage. "That dog knows things that could hurt important people, little girl. Sometimes protecting important people means making hard choices." Liberty's growl started low, almost subsonic, then built to a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the wooden porch. Her hackles rose, transforming her from a wounded refugee into something that looked capable of tearing through steel. The men in Morrison's car shifted nervously, and Sam could see weapon shapes moving in the shadows. "Last chance, Mitchell," Morrison called out. "Hand over the dog, and we'll call it even. Keep her, and what happened to your son starts looking like an accident compared to what's coming." The threat hung in the air like smoke, poisoning everything it touched. Grace's grip on Sam's hand tightened, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she looked up at her grandfather with eyes that held far too much understanding for a 9-year-old. "They killed Daddy because of something like this. Didn't they, Grandpa?" Sam felt his heart break and mend simultaneously at her quiet strength. "Yeah, sweetheart. I think they did." Eddie was already on his radio calling for backup from his security company, but Sam knew that help might not arrive in time, and Morrison's men were growing restless in their car. The detective himself was studying the approaches to the house with the practiced eye of someone planning an assault. Then Liberty did something that changed everything. She walked to the edge of the porch and sat, perfectly straight, her military bearing impossible to miss, even in the dim light. She held that position for exactly 10 seconds, then moved to a different spot and repeated the performance. "She's signaling," Eddie breathed. "Jesus Christ, Sam, she's trying to tell us something." Grace watched the dog's movements with rapt attention, her young mind processing patterns that adults might miss. "She's showing us where they are," she whispered. "Look, one there, 2 by the fence line, 1 circling around back." Eddie's radio crackled to life with confirmation from his backup units positioned on the highway. Morrison had brought more than the visible car. There were at least 6 men surrounding the property, all armed, all moving into position for what looked like a coordinated assault. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything Sam had imagined when he'd paid $15 for a sick dog at the farmer's market. This wasn't about Liberty anymore. This was about silencing everyone who might connect Morrison to Michael's death and the network of corruption that had killed him. As if reading his thoughts, Morrison's voice carried across the darkness one final time. "You've got 10 minutes to think about what's more important to you, old man. That dog, or your granddaughter's future." The sedan's engine revved once, then the car disappeared back down the driveway, leaving behind only the sound of crickets and the rapid beating of 3 human hearts. But Sam knew Morrison hadn't left. He'd just moved to a position where the killing could be done quietly, away from potential witnesses. Liberty returned to Grace's side, but her posture remained alert. She knew, with the instinct of a warrior, that the real battle was just beginning. The attack came at 3 in the morning, silent and coordinated like a military operation. Liberty's low growl woke Sam from his restless sleep on the living room couch, the German shepherd's body rigid with tension as she stared toward the kitchen. Grace slept fitfully in the recliner beside him, wrapped in Martha's old quilt, her small hand still clutching Liberty's collar even in sleep. Eddie had positioned himself at the front window, his night vision scope revealing the shadows moving through Sam's property with practiced stealth. 6 men, maybe 7, he whispered into his radio. Professional movements. These aren't local deputies. Sam checked his service revolver one more time, the weight familiar in his weathered hands. 40 years ago, he'd carried similar iron in Vietnam, but he'd never imagined he'd need it to protect his granddaughter in his own home. The irony wasn't lost on him. Liberty had spent her career serving the same government that now hunted her. The first breach came through the back door, the lock picked with surgical precision. Liberty's ears flattened against her skull, but she didn't bark. Instead, she moved with fluid grace to position herself between the approaching threat and Grace's sleeping form. Her training was evident in every calculated step. This was a dog who understood urban warfare. Eddie's backup arrived just as the first intruder stepped into the kitchen, his tactical gear and automatic weapon painting him as something far more dangerous than a corrupt local cop. The sound of vehicles screeching up the driveway shattered the night's silence, and suddenly Sam's quiet farmhouse became the center of a firefight that would have made his old drill sergeant proud. "Federal agents!" the voice boomed through a bullhorn from outside. "This is FBI! Stand down immediately!" But Morrison's men were already committed to their assault. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions around the house, the sharp crack of automatic weapons answered by the deeper boom of shotguns. Grace jerked awake with a scream that Liberty immediately muffled by pressing close to her, the dog's body serving as both comfort and shield. "Stay down, sweetheart," Sam commanded, crawling toward the window to assess their situation. Through the chaos, he could see Morrison himself directing his men from behind a black SUV, his face twisted with the kind of rage that came from desperation. This wasn't just about silencing witnesses anymore. This had become personal. Liberty suddenly bolted toward the kitchen, her powerful frame moving with purpose that Sam recognized from his military days. She wasn't fleeing, she was flanking. The dog disappeared through the kitchen doorway just as one of Morrison's men rounded the corner, his weapon raised and ready. The man's scream echoed through the house, followed by the sound of bodies hitting the floor. And Liberty reappeared moments later, blood on her muzzle, but her eyes calm and professional. She'd neutralized the threat with the same clinical efficiency she'd learned in military service, then immediately returned to her primary mission of protecting Grace. Eddie's voice carried across the chaos. "FBI's got the perimeter locked down. Morrison's trapped." But the detective wasn't finished. Through the window, Sam watched Morrison break from cover, moving toward the house with the desperate intensity of a man with nothing left to lose. His weapon was drawn, and his destination was clear. He was coming for Grace, the only witness young enough that her testimony might be dismissed as childhood imagination. "He's coming for the girl," Sam told Eddie, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. "That's his endgame. Kill Grace, kill Liberty, make it look like we resisted federal agents." Liberty's hackles rose again, but this time her attention was focused on something else entirely. She moved to the living room wall and began pawing at a section of baseboard that looked identical to all the others. Grace watched with fascination as the dog's behavior became increasingly urgent. "What is it, girl?" Grace whispered, crawling toward the spot, despite her grandfather's attempts to keep her down. The child's small fingers found what Liberty's nose had detected: a loose section of baseboard that swung away to reveal a hiding place Sam hadn't known existed. Inside was a waterproof case containing documents, photographs, and a digital recorder that had been carefully concealed by someone who understood the value of insurance policies. Grace's young voice carried across the chaos as she read from one of the documents. "Evidence log, Detective Michael Mitchell, unauthorized investigation into—" Her voice trailed off as the words became too complex, but Sam understood immediately. His son had hidden the proof of Morrison's corruption in Sam's own house, trusting that his father would eventually find it. The digital recorder contained hours of secretly recorded conversations between Morrison and his associates, detailing the sale of retired military working dogs to illegal fighting rings and the elimination of anyone who threatened to expose the operation. Morrison's boot steps thundered across the front porch just as Grace triggered the recorder's playback function. Morrison's own voice filled the living room, cold and calculating, as he discussed the accidental death of Detective Michael Mitchell and the need to clean up loose ends, including the girl and the old man. The front door exploded inward under Morrison's assault, but he found himself facing not just Sam's revolver, but Liberty in full attack mode. The German Shepherd launched herself at Morrison with 40 pounds of trained fury, her jaws clamping onto his gun arm with the precise targeting of a military weapon system. Morrison screamed as his pistol clattered across the hardwood floor, but Liberty wasn't finished. She drove him backward through the doorway onto the porch, her attack as relentless as it was professional. This wasn't the desperate violence of an abused animal. This was the calculated response of a warrior protecting her pack. The FBI agents who swarmed onto the porch found Morrison pinned beneath Liberty's weight, his tactical gear shredded and his weapon arm hanging useless at his side. The dog maintained her position until Grace's small voice called her name, then immediately released her grip and returned to the child's side. Agent Sarah Martinez, the FBI task force leader, surveyed the scene with professional appreciation. "That dog just did our job for us," she observed, watching Liberty settle protectively beside Grace. "Morrison's been under federal investigation for 8 months. We've been building a case around the testimony of surviving handlers whose dogs were sold into illegal operations." Sam handed over Michael's hidden evidence with hands that finally stopped shaking. "My son was working with you?" "Your son was the reason we opened this investigation," Martinez replied. "Detective Michael Mitchell reached out to us 6 months before his death with evidence of systematic corruption involving retired military working dogs. We tried to bring him in as a protected witness, but he refused to leave Sunset Ridge, said his family was his responsibility." Grace looked up from where she sat with Liberty, her young face showing understanding beyond her years. "Daddy stayed because of me and Grandpa. He knew Morrison would hurt us if he ran away." The weight of Michael's sacrifice settled over Sam like a lead blanket. His son had died not because he'd stumbled into something by accident, but because he'd chosen to fight a war he knew he might not survive. The same nobility that had driven him to become a police officer had ultimately cost him his life. As the FBI agents led Morrison away in restraints, the corrupt detective's eyes found Grace one final time. "This isn't over," he snarled. "There are others. They'll come for that dog, and when they do—" His words were cut off as Liberty rose to her feet, her professional bearing transforming into something primal and dangerous. The sound that emerged from her throat wasn't quite a growl. It was deeper, older, the voice of wolves who had learned to stand with humans against the darkness. Morrison actually stepped backward, his face pale with sudden understanding. He wasn't just threatening a little girl and her pet. He was threatening the bond between species that had been forged in warfare and sealed in blood. Liberty had served her country with honor, had watched her human partners die in foreign lands, had given everything she had to the mission. Now, in her twilight years, she'd found something worth protecting that transcended duty or training. As the tactical vehicles disappeared into the Texas dawn, Sam sat on his damaged porch with Grace curled against his side and Liberty's head resting on his boots. The dog's breathing was labored from her exertions, and new cuts marked her scarred hide, but her eyes held a peace that hadn't been there the day before. Agent Martinez approached them as her team finished processing the scene. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask about Liberty's future. Technically, she's still government property. There are protocols for retired military working dogs that we need to follow." Grace's arms tightened around Liberty's neck, and Sam felt his own protective instincts flare. They'd paid too high a price for this family to be separated now by bureaucratic regulations, but Martinez was smiling. "However, given the circumstances and Liberty's exemplary service to this investigation, I think we can arrange for her official retirement papers to reflect a transfer to civilian custody, effective immediately." The relief that washed over Sam was so intense it left him dizzy. Liberty was safe. Grace was safe. Michael's killers were in custody, and the network that had cost his son's life was finally exposed to the light. As the sun rose over Sunset Ridge, painting the sky in shades of hope and renewal, 3 generations of survivors settled into the rhythm of healing. The battle was over, but the war for justice had just begun. The victory lasted exactly 72 hours. Sam woke on Tuesday morning to find Liberty collapsed in the kitchen, her breathing shallow and her noble head resting in a pool of blood that had seeped from somewhere deep inside her chest. Grace's screams brought him running from the bathroom, his bare feet slipping on the linoleum as he dropped to his knees beside the German shepherd who had saved their lives. "Liberty, no, please, don't leave us," Grace sobbed, her small hands hovering over the dog's still form, afraid to touch her for fear of causing more pain. The child's face was streaked with tears and something else, the kind of devastation that comes when hope is ripped away just as healing begins. Dr. Collins arrived within minutes of Sam's frantic call, but her grim expression told the story before she even opened her medical bag. The emergency surgery that followed stretched through the morning and into the afternoon, with Grace maintaining a vigil in the clinic's waiting room while Sam paced the parking lot like a caged animal. "The internal damage is extensive," Dr. Collins explained when she finally emerged from surgery, her scrubs stained and her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had fought death and lost. Those injuries from the fight with Morrison reopened internal wounds that never properly healed. She's been bleeding internally for days, maybe weeks. The stress of the confrontation just accelerated the process. Sam felt his knees buckle. After everything they'd endured, after Morrison's arrest and the promise of justice, Liberty was dying not from enemy fire, but from the accumulated damage of a lifetime spent in service to others. The irony was cruel beyond words. "Can you save her?" Grace asked, her voice so small it barely carried across the sterile clinic air. "Doctor." Collins knelt beside the child, her weathered hands gentle on Grace's shoulders. "Sweetheart, Liberty's body has been through more trauma than most creatures could survive. The fact that she lived long enough to protect you and your grandfather is already a miracle. Her heart is giving out, and there's nothing more we can do except make sure she's comfortable." The drive home was the longest of Sam's life. Liberty lay unconscious on a blanket in the truck bed, her breathing so faint it was almost undetectable. Grace sat beside her grandfather in complete silence, her small world collapsing around the reality that love wasn't always enough to save what mattered most. Agent Martinez arrived at sunset, her official FBI vehicle looking out of place in Sam's rural driveway. She carried flowers and a manila envelope thick with documents, but her expression was somber as she approached the porch where Liberty lay on her favorite blanket. Grace's hand resting protectively on the dog's flank. "I heard about Liberty's condition," Martinez said quietly. "I wanted to bring her retirement papers, official recognition of her service record." She handed the envelope to Sam, but her eyes never left the dying German shepherd. 12 years of active duty, 2 Purple Hearts, distinguished service in 3 combat zones. She saved more lives than we'll ever know. Grace looked up with red-rimmed eyes. Then why is God letting her die? If she was such a good dog, why can't she stay with us? The question hung in the evening air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Martinez knelt beside Grace, her federal agent composure softening as she searched for words that could comfort a 9-year-old facing the cruelest lesson life had to offer. "Sometimes the best soldiers are the ones who give everything they have," she said finally. "Liberty spent her whole life protecting people, and protecting you and your grandfather was her final mission. She completed it perfectly." But Grace wasn't comforted. Her small body shook with sobs as she buried her face in Liberty's fur, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and courage that had become so familiar. "I don't want her final mission to be over. I want her to have more missions. I want her to teach me how to be brave like her." Sam felt his own eyes burn with unshed tears as he watched his granddaughter's heart break in real time. The child had already lost her parents, had already endured more trauma than most adults could handle. Now she was losing the one creature who had helped her find her voice again, who had shown her that love could exist without the threat of abandonment. As the sun disappeared behind the Texas hills, Liberty's breathing became more labored. "Doctor." Collins had warned them that this moment would come, had prepared them for the signs, but nothing could have prepared Sam for the sound his granddaughter made when she realized their borrowed time was running out. "Grandpa," Grace whispered, her voice breaking on the words, "will you tell her that I love her? Will you tell her that she's the best dog in the whole world?" Sam's throat constricted as he leaned over Liberty's still form, his weathered hand finding the spot behind her ears that she'd always loved. "She knows, sweetheart. She's always known." His own voice cracked as the weight of impending loss settled over them like a shroud. "Liberty, you gave us everything. You brought our family back together. You showed Grace how to be brave again. You can rest now, girl. We'll be okay." Liberty's eyes opened one final time, finding Grace's face with the same intelligent intensity she'd shown that first day at the farmer's market. The dog's tail twitched once, a final gesture of recognition and love, before her breathing stilled and the light faded from her noble brown eyes. Grace's scream shattered the evening silence, a sound that spoke to every parent's nightmare and every child's worst fear. She threw herself across Liberty's still form, her small body racked with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her 9-year-old heart could hold. Sam gathered both his granddaughter and Liberty in his arms, his own tears falling freely for the first time since Martha's death. The German shepherd felt impossibly heavy and impossibly light at the same time, her warrior's body finally at peace, but her absence creating a vacuum that threatened to swallow them whole. Agent Martinez stood at the edge of the porch, her own eyes bright with unshed tears as she witnessed the raw grief of a family losing their protector. She'd seen death in combat zones, had delivered countless notifications to grieving families, but there was something about watching a child say goodbye to her best friend that cut deeper than professional detachment could defend against. "She died free," Martinez said quietly, her voice barely audible above Grace's sobs. "After everything she'd been through, everything that had been done to her, she died surrounded by people who loved her. Not every soldier gets that gift." But Grace was beyond comfort. The child who had found her voice through Liberty's presence retreated into a silence deeper than anything Sam had witnessed since her parents' death. She clutched the German shepherd's collar, her small fingers tracing the metal tags that would outlive the dog who had worn them with such dignity. The night stretched endless and cruel around them, filled with the absence of Liberty's protective presence. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of wind through the trees emphasized the vacuum where her alertness had once stood guard. Grace finally fell asleep, curled against Liberty's still form, her tear-stained face peaceful only in unconsciousness. Sam sat vigil through the darkest hours, his hand resting on Liberty's cooling flank, while his mind struggled to process a loss that felt both inevitable and impossible. The German Shepherd had entered their lives like a gift from his dead son, had given them purpose and protection and the kind of unconditional love that humans spent lifetimes trying to understand. Now, she was gone, leaving behind only memories and the terrible certainty that some bonds transcend death, while others are severed with surgical cruelty. The dog who had survived warfare and corruption, who had endured abuse and abandonment, had finally succumbed to the one enemy that no training could defeat. As dawn approached, Sam made the hardest decision of his 72 years. He gently lifted his sleeping granddaughter from Liberty's side, carried her into the house, and began the phone calls that would turn their private grief into the public ceremony that Liberty's service had earned. The warrior deserved a soldier's farewell, even if it meant letting the whole world witness their broken hearts. The funeral director's hands trembled as he read the documents Agent Martinez had provided, his professional composure cracking under the weight of what he was being asked to arrange. "Mr. Mitchell, I've been in this business for 30 years and I've never... the federal government is requesting full military honors for a dog?" Sam sat across the mahogany desk with Grace, silent beside him, her small hand clutching Liberty's collar like a lifeline. The child hadn't spoken a word since dawn, when they'd wrapped the German Shepherd's still form in Martha's best quilt and loaded her into Dr. Collins's veterinary transport vehicle. "Not just any dog," Sam said quietly. "A decorated war veteran who gave her life protecting American citizens. She earned those honors through 12 years of service, and she's going to receive them." The arrangements that followed seemed surreal in their scope and formality. Agent Martinez had mobilized resources that Sam hadn't known existed, calling in favors from military contacts who understood the bond between handlers and their four-legged partners. A cemetery plot in the Veterans section of Sunset Ridge Memorial Gardens, an honor guard from the local National Guard unit, a flag presentation ceremony that would be filmed for military archives. But Grace remained locked in her silence, retreating deeper into herself as the preparations swirled around her. She sat through meetings with chaplains and photographers, her young face blank as they discussed the celebration of Liberty's life and the healing power of proper closure. The adults meant well, but they couldn't understand that no ceremony could fill the vacuum left by Liberty's absence. The breakthrough came 3 days before the funeral, when Grace was helping Sam sort through Liberty's possessions in the garage workshop. Among the dog toys and blankets, Grace found something that made her gasp, a small wooden box hidden beneath Liberty's favorite sleeping mat. Inside were items that told the story of Liberty's true past, military dog tags bearing the name K9 Liberty and her service number, faded photographs of her with soldiers in combat gear, and a letter written in careful handwriting on Department of Defense letterhead. Grace's voice cracked as she read aloud. "If you're reading this, it means Liberty found her way to safety and to people who will love her the way she deserves. I'm Sergeant James Morrison, her first handler, and I need you to know that this dog is the reason I'm alive today. She saved my life in Afghanistan, pulled me from a burning vehicle when I was unconscious and bleeding. I couldn't take her home when my tour ended, Medical discharge, PTSD, couldn't provide the stability she needed. But I never stopped thinking about her, never stopped hoping she'd find peace. The letter continued with details that painted a picture of Liberty's early years, her training at Lackland Air Force Base, her deployments to combat zones, her specialized skills in detecting explosives and tracking high-value targets. But it was the final paragraph that broke both Sam and Grace's hearts. Liberty has nightmares sometimes. She whimpers in her sleep and her legs move like she's running. She's seen things no creature should see, but she never let it make her mean or bitter. If she's with you now, it means she chose you. Liberty doesn't trust easily, but when she does, it's forever. Grace looked up at her grandfather with tears streaming down her face. She chose us, Grandpa. Even when she was hurt and scared, she chose us. The revelation transformed Grace's grief from despair into something more complex, a mixture of sorrow and pride that seemed to give her young shoulders the strength to carry Liberty's memory with dignity. She spent the next 2 days preparing a speech for the funeral, writing and rewriting words that could somehow capture what Liberty had meant to their broken family. The funeral itself drew a crowd that surprised everyone involved. Veterans from 3 counties came to pay their respects, some in uniform and others in their civilian clothes but wearing their service with quiet pride. Families who had lost military working dogs traveled from as far away as Oklahoma and New Mexico, bringing flowers and photographs of their own fallen heroes. Agent Martinez stood at the podium in her dress uniform, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd as she recounted Liberty's official service record. K-9 Liberty served with distinction in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. She completed over 200 combat missions, detected 37 improvised explosive devices, and was directly responsible for saving the lives of 43 American service members and countless civilians. But it was Grace who delivered the words that would be remembered long after the ceremony ended. The 9-year-old girl stepped up to the microphone with Liberty's collar in her hands, her voice clear and strong as she spoke from her heart. Liberty wasn't just a war hero. She was my best friend. She taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right, even when you are scared. She showed me that love isn't about words, it's about staying with someone even when it's dangerous. She proved that families aren't just the people you're born with. They're the ones who choose to protect you no matter what. Grace paused, looking out at the sea of faces before continuing. My daddy died trying to help dogs like Liberty. Dogs who served our country and then got thrown away when they weren't useful anymore. But Liberty wasn't thrown away. She was saved, and she saved us right back. She gave me my voice again when I thought I'd lost it forever. She gave my grandpa a reason to smile again after Grandma and Daddy died. She gave us hope when we didn't think we had any left. The child's voice grew stronger as she neared the end of her speech. I don't understand why good dogs have to die, or why good people like my daddy have to die trying to help them. But I know that Liberty's story isn't over, because she taught us how to love without being afraid. She taught us that doing the right thing is more important than being safe. And she taught us that sometimes the family we need finds us when we need them most. As Grace stepped away from the microphone, there wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. The honor guard folded the flag that had draped Liberty's casket with the same precision they would have shown for any fallen soldier, then presented it to Grace with words that would echo in her heart forever. On behalf of the President of the United States and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. The final surprise came as the ceremony concluded. Agent Martinez approached Sam and Grace with a manila envelope similar to the one containing Liberty's service records. But this one bore different markings. the seal of a federal witness protection program and documents that would change their lives forever. The investigation into Morrison's network has uncovered evidence that extends far beyond what we initially suspected, Martinez explained quietly. Your son Michael's research was more comprehensive than we realized, and there are still dangerous people who might seek retribution against his family. We're offering you relocation, new identities, complete protection. Sam looked down at Grace, who was still clutching the folded flag to her chest. The child met his gaze with eyes that held far too much wisdom for her 9 years, and her words surprised him with their maturity. We're not running away, Grandpa. Liberty didn't run when things got scary, and Daddy didn't run when people threatened him. We're staying right here where we belong. The decision was made in that moment, standing beside Liberty's grave as the sun set over Sunset Ridge. They would honor the German Shepherd's memory not by hiding from the consequences of their fight for justice, but by continuing the work that had cost Michael his life and Liberty her peace. Agent Martinez nodded with what might have been respect. Then we'll provide security and support for as long as necessary. Your family has earned the right to choose your own path. As the crowd dispersed and the honor guard departed, Sam and Grace remained beside the fresh grave marker that bore Liberty's name and dates of service. The headstone was simple granite, engraved with the words Grace had chosen. K-9 Liberty, faithful protector, loyal friend, family, forever. The child knelt and placed her hand on the warm stone, her voice barely audible in the evening breeze. Thank you for choosing us, Liberty. Thank you for teaching us how to be brave. We promise we'll take care of each other the way you took care of us. Sam felt his throat constrict as he watched his granddaughter say goodbye with a grace that would have made her parents proud. The German Shepherd had given them more than protection. She'd given them the strength to face whatever came next with dignity and courage. As they walked back to the truck, Grace's small hand found Sam's weathered one. Grandpa, do you think Liberty knew she was going to die when she saved us from Morrison? Sam considered the question seriously, remembering the intelligent awareness in Liberty's brown eyes during those final confrontations. Yeah, sweetheart. I think she knew. But she did it anyway, because that's what love looks like. Grace nodded solemnly, her young mind processing lessons about sacrifice and loyalty that most adults never fully understood. Then we have to live like she did. We have to protect people even when it's scary. The truth of her words settled over Sam like a benediction. Liberty's death wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of their mission to continue the work that had brought them together. The German Shepherd's legacy would live on through the lives she'd saved and the family she'd helped heal. But as they drove home through the darkening Texas landscape, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that their trials were far from over. Liberty's sacrifice had exposed a network of corruption that extended far beyond Morrison's reach, and there would be others who viewed the Mitchell family as loose ends that needed to be tied off permanently. The battle for justice was just beginning, and they would have to fight it without their four-legged guardian angel. The revelation came 6 months after Liberty's funeral, hidden in the most unlikely place imaginable. Grace was cleaning out her late father's desk drawers when her small fingers found a loose board in the back panel. Behind it lay a manila envelope containing documents that would shatter everything they thought they knew about Liberty's past. The first photograph showed a younger Liberty standing beside a man in military fatigues, both of them posed in front of a transport helicopter. But the man wasn't Sergeant James Morrison from the letter they'd found. This soldier was older, with kind eyes and a familiar smile that made Grace's breath catch in her throat. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet house. "Come look at this." Sam's weathered hands trembled as he took the photograph, his eyes scanning the image with growing disbelief. The soldier in the picture was unmistakably his son Michael, but the timestamp showed it was taken 3 years before his death, during what Michael had claimed was a routine training exercise in Colorado. The envelope contained dozens more photographs documenting Michael's secret partnership with Liberty. Pictures of them working together in various locations across Texas, Liberty's nose pressed to the ground as she tracked scents while Michael photographed evidence. Documents showing that Michael had adopted Liberty through an unofficial channel, using fake retirement papers to protect her from the very network he was investigating. But it was the final item that revealed the full scope of Michael's deception. A letter addressed to Sam and Grace, sealed and marked, "To be opened only in the event of my death." Grace's young voice cracked as she read her father's words aloud. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means they got to me before I could finish what Liberty and I started. She's not just any retired military dog, she's the key witness to everything. Liberty was present at Morrison's meetings with his contacts. She was trained not just to detect explosives, but to locate and mark evidence. Every corrupt deal, every payoff, every location where they disposed of dogs who knew too much. Liberty remembers it all." The letter continued with details that painted Michael's investigation in an entirely new light. He hadn't stumbled onto Morrison's network by accident. He'd been hunting it for years, using Liberty's unique abilities to build an airtight case. The German Shepherd's damaged condition when they found her at the farmer's market hadn't been the result of random cruelty. She'd been tortured by Morrison's associates, trying to force her to reveal the locations where she'd buried evidence at Michael's direction. "Liberty chose you that day at the market because she recognized Dad's scent on our clothes," Grace said, her understanding growing with each revelation. "She came to us because she knew we were family." Sam sank into Michael's old desk chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his son's courage and the weight of secrets that had died with him. All those months when Michael had claimed to be working late or attending training exercises, he'd actually been conducting a dangerous undercover investigation with only a German Shepherd as his backup. The most stunning revelation came in the letter's final paragraphs. Liberty buried evidence caches at 17 different locations across central Texas. She's the only one who knows where they all are, and Morrison's people will never stop hunting her until she's dead. If something happens to me, Liberty will try to show you these locations. Follow her lead, Dad. Trust her instincts the way I learned to trust them. The evidence she's protecting could put dozens of corrupt officials behind bars and save hundreds of dogs still trapped in the system. Grace looked up from the letter with eyes that held far too much understanding for a 9-year-old. "She tried to show us before she died, didn't she, Grandpa? All those times she kept going to different spots around the property, scratching at the ground?" The memory hit Sam like a physical blow. Liberty's behavior in her final days, the way she'd insisted on walking the property line despite her weakness, pawing at seemingly random locations, whimpering with frustration when they couldn't understand what she was trying to communicate. She'd been attempting to complete Michael's mission even as her body failed her. Agent Martinez arrived within hours of Sam's phone call, her expression grim as she studied Michael's hidden documents. "This changes everything," she said quietly. "We thought we'd dismantled Morrison's network, but these locations could contain evidence of a much larger operation. The problem is, without Liberty, we have no way of finding the buried caches." "Yes, we do," Grace said with quiet determination that surprised both adults. "Liberty taught me how to read her signals. She showed me the patterns before she died. I know where she would have hidden things." Over the following week, Grace led a team of FBI agents across central Texas, following instincts that seemed too sophisticated for a child her age. At each location, her small fingers would trace patterns in the dirt that mimicked Liberty's scratching behavior, leading them to evidence caches that contained enough documentation to indict 43 additional suspects in Morrison's network. The final cache, buried beneath a oak tree on Sam's own property, contained the most damaging evidence of all. Video recordings of Morrison discussing the planned murder of Detective Michael Mitchell and the systematic elimination of military working dogs who had witnessed criminal activities. Liberty had been wearing a hidden camera during these meetings, her handler's final insurance policy against the corruption that ultimately killed him. But the discovery brought unexpected consequences. As news of the expanded investigation leaked to the media, threatening phone calls began arriving at all hours of the day and night. Cars with tinted windows appeared on the rural roads around Sunset Ridge, their occupants photographing the Mitchell house with telephoto lenses. Grace couldn't walk to the school bus stop without a federal escort. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening when Grace found a dead dog on their front porch. A German Shepherd puppy that had been tortured and killed as a message. The accompanying note was brief and brutal. Liberty's legacy ends here. That night, as Grace sobbed over the innocent victim of adult cruelty, Sam made a decision that would have made his son proud. Instead of accepting witness protection or retreating into hiding, he called a press conference and invited every news outlet in Texas to hear Grace tell Liberty's story. The 9-year-old girl stood behind a podium too tall for her small frame, her voice clear and steady as she addressed a room full of reporters and cameras. "My name is Grace Mitchell, and my dog Liberty was murdered by bad people who hurt animals for money. They killed my daddy too because he tried to stop them. But Liberty made sure the truth wouldn't die with her." Grace's testimony, broadcast across national media, transformed public opinion overnight. Donations poured in from across the country, not just money, but offers of protection from veterans organizations and animal rights groups. The story of the little girl and her war hero dog touched something fundamental in the American consciousness. The belief that innocence deserved protection and courage deserved recognition. Within months, legislation was introduced in Congress to strengthen protections for military working dogs and establish mandatory retirement programs that would prevent animals like Liberty from disappearing into illegal networks. Grace was invited to testify before congressional committees, her young voice carrying the moral authority that adult politicians lacked. But the most meaningful change came closer to home. Using donations from Liberty's story, Sam and Grace established the Liberty Foundation, a sanctuary for retired military working dogs that provided medical care, rehabilitation, and loving homes for animals who had served their country with distinction. The Foundation's headquarters occupied the same property where Liberty had spent her final days, her grave serving as a reminder of the price of justice. On the first anniversary of Liberty's death, Grace stood beside the headstone with a German Shepherd puppy in her arms, one of dozens rescued through the Foundation's work. The puppy, named Justice, had been found in conditions similar to those Liberty had endured, but now he played happily in Martha's restored garden, his future secure. "Liberty, we kept our promise," Grace said softly, her voice carrying across the peaceful cemetery. "We're protecting dogs like you now. We're making sure they get to be heroes instead of victims. And we're not afraid anymore, because you taught us that love is stronger than fear." Sam watched his granddaughter with pride that bordered on awe. The traumatized child who had lost her voice after her parents' death had become an advocate whose testimony had changed federal law. The German Shepherd who had been discarded like garbage had become the catalyst for reforms that would protect thousands of animals. As the sun set over Sunset Ridge, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, 3 generations of survivors stood together in the gathering dusk. Sam's weathered hands rested on Grace's shoulders, while Justice played at their feet, his young bark echoing across the fields where Liberty had once stood guard. The battle against corruption would continue, fought in courtrooms and congressional hearings by people who remembered a dog named Liberty and the family who refused to let her sacrifice be meaningless. But in this quiet moment, surrounded by the fruits of their courage, they had already won the only victory that truly mattered. They had kept faith with a promise made to a dying hero, and in doing so, they had discovered that love truly was stronger than fear, that justice could triumph over corruption, and that sometimes the family we need finds us exactly when we need them most. Liberty's story would live on, not just in the laws that bore her name or the animals saved through her foundation, but in the hearts of everyone who learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing what's right, despite being afraid. The German Shepherd had taught them all how to be human. Sometimes life takes everything from us: spouses, children, health, purpose, leaving us feeling forgotten in a world that seems to value only youth and productivity. Sam Mitchell knew that emptiness, the hollow ache of losing Martha, then Michael, then facing the twilight years, wondering if anyone would remember his name when he was gone. But at 72, on an ordinary Saturday in a dusty Texas farmer's market, $15 changed everything. That emaciated German Shepherd named Liberty didn't just need rescuing. She came to rescue him and 9-year-old Grace from their shared grief. Through Liberty's courage, they discovered that family isn't just blood, it's the bonds we choose to honor. They learned that our greatest purpose often comes not from what we achieve for ourselves, but from what we sacrifice to protect others. In their fight against corruption, in Grace's transformation from traumatized child to fearless advocate, in the legacy that saved hundreds of military working dogs, they found proof that even in our later years, we can still be heroes in someone else's story. The love we give echoes long after we're gone, creating ripples of hope that touch lives we'll never even know. Have you ever had an unexpected encounter that completely changed your life's direction? What do you believe is the most important legacy we can leave for the next generation?